All right, let's get right into it. We're going to tackle one of the most complex questions out there. Why, for over 100 years, has the Middle East seemed to be in a constant state of conflict? We're going to unravel this knot, and to do that, we have to go right back to the very beginning.
So just for a second, think about it. When I say the words Middle East, what are the first things that pop into your head? For a lot of us, I bet it's a few very specific and pretty heavy ideas. You're probably thinking about things like oil, constant political instability, and of course, war and conflict. It doesn't matter if we're talking about Syria, Yemen, Iraq, or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it just feels like a region caught in a permanent cycle of crisis.
And you know, this isn't something new. This has been the reality on the ground for more than a century. So to really get why this is, we have to rewind the clock. We have to go back to the moment where these modern problems were actually born.
And our story really kicks off with the total collapse of a massive ancient power, the Ottoman Empire. This single event, more than anything else, set the stage for pretty much everything that was about to follow.
I mean, think about it. For 600 years, the Ottomans had ruled this vast territory. It was home to Arabs, Kurds, Turks, Christians, Jews, Muslims, all living together. But they picked the wrong side in World War I, and when they lost, this enormous empire, well, it just vanished.
And in its place, a whole series of secret deals and public treaties carved up the entire region. What's so wild when you look at this timeline is just how fast it all went down. In less than a single decade, European powers basically took a pen, dismantled an empire, and drew the map of the modern Middle East.
And here is the absolute key to everything. These new borders had nothing to do with the people who actually lived there. Not a thing. They were drawn purely to serve the interests of Britain and France. You know, to secure a port over here, control a trade route there, maybe lock down a future oil field. They completely ignored the complicated mix of ethnicities, religions, and tribes on the ground.
And this is a perfect example of the problem. Just look at how Iraq was created. The British literally took three completely different Ottoman provinces: Mosul, which was mostly Kurdish, Baghdad, which was Sunni Arab, and Basra, which was Shia Arab, and they just smashed them together into one new country. They basically designed a state that was built to be unstable right from day one.
Now, into this brand new, fractured, and unstable region, something was discovered that would basically pour gasoline on the fire and change the course of history. Oil. 50%. I mean, just let that sink in. Half of the world's entire known oil reserves were sitting right under the sand of this newly divided and politically fragile part of the world. And just like that, the Middle East went from being a messy, post-colonial problem to being the world's gas station. Suddenly, controlling these new, fragile states became an absolute top priority for global superpowers who now had a huge stake in who was calling the shots. And if that wasn't complicated enough, look where the oil was actually found. So often, it was in areas populated by minority groups, like the Kurdish regions of Iraq and Syria, or the Shia areas in Sunni-ruled Saudi Arabia. This was a recipe for disaster. It gave the central governments every reason that clamped down on those minority groups to control the oil wealth. And, at the same time, it gave those exact same groups a powerful dream, that this oil could fund their very own independent state. So at the exact same time all these new borders and oil interests are taking hold, another monumental piece is dropped right into the middle of the puzzle, the creation of a new state, right in the heart of the Arab world. And it would spark one of the most difficult and lasting conflicts of our time. So, after World War II, the UN stepped in with a plan to divide the British-controlled territory of Palestine. And just look at the numbers here. The Jewish population, which was about 1/3 of the total, was given 62% of the land. The Arab population, which made up the other 2/3, was given 38%. As you can imagine, Arab leaders immediately rejected this plan.
When Israel declared its independence in 1948, war immediately broke out. And in the chaos that followed, this staggering number of Palestinian Arabs, 700,000, either fled their homes or were forced out, becoming refugees overnight.
And that event sent shockwaves across the entire region. Take a country like Lebanon. The sudden flood of refugees completely upended the country's delicate religious and political balance, and it's seen as one of the direct causes of the brutal 15-year-long civil war that erupted there decades later. It's just a textbook example of how one crisis bleeds directly into the next.
Okay, so the board is now set. You've got these artificial borders, you have the massive prize of oil, and you have the brand new flashpoint of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The stage was perfectly set for the Cold War, which turned the Middle East into a giant chessboard for superpowers to fight over.
And you can really see how things just kept escalating.
First, you get these internal movements, like Arab nationalism, which start to challenge the old kings propped up by the West. Then that internal tension explodes into a global fight. In Yemen, a local civil war becomes the first big proxy battle between the US and the Soviet Union. And then, the 1979 Iranian Revolution adds a whole new religious layer to the fight, creating this intense rivalry between Shia Iran and Sunni Saudi Arabia, a rivalry that would directly fuel the horrifying 8-year-long Iran-Iraq War.
So after 100 years of all these events crashing into one another, where are we now? Well, we're left with that tangled, complicated knot that is the Middle East today. That chessboard we talked about, it's more crowded than it has ever been. You've got regional powers like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey, and you've got global powers like the US and Russia, and they're all maneuvering for position, often by backing different sides in someone else's war. And when you look at today's headlines, you can see the ghosts of that history everywhere. Syria isn't just a civil war, it's a global proxy battle. The war in Yemen is fueled by that Saudi-Iranian rivalry. Iraq's endless instability is a direct legacy of how it was artificially created. And the Kurds are still fighting for a homeland they were denied when those lines were first drawn in the sand a century ago.
So if you take one thing away from all this, let it be this. The wars we see today are not random, they're not inevitable. They are the modern-day earthquakes happening along fault lines that were carved into the map 100 years ago by outside powers. Those weren't just borders, they were fault lines, waiting to crack.
And that leaves us with one last, really challenging question to think about. If the map of the past is the source of the problem, what would a map for a more peaceful future even look like?